We've all seen what's going on in China's housing market over the last year. The greatest bubble of all time blew up slowly over 2 decades. It was fueled by speculation, government policy, and a population that became obsessed with buying apartments. But after the COVID pandemic, it all started to fall apart. Now, every single month we are seeing property prices fall in China, and they've already crashed by about 30% on average, which is even worse than we saw during the 2008 global financial crisis. Still though, every month they just keep on dropping, and it isn't going to stop anytime soon. What is still to be seen though is where this crash will end up going and what the Chinese Communist Party will actually do about it. And in this regards, we've just gotten a hold of some leaked documents and information from the CCP that indicates they're planning on nationalizing the entire property sector in China, taking control of everything for themselves and setting the stage for true communism under a communist government. For anyone who hasn't heard about the world's largest property bubble though, what is the backstory here? Well, when China industrialized and turned into a modern economy, the government noticed it was really easy to drive growth through construction. There's an old saying that goes, if you want to add $1 trillion to your GDP, you just have to build $1 trillion bridge, and the CCP took this idea to heart. They allowed enterprise and capitalism to take hold and build pretty much anything in China in the name of economic growth. But mostly, these corporations focused on apartments that average and ordinary Chinese citizens would buy. You see, in China, investing in stocks is very dangerous because fraud is rampant and the government would frequently and randomly attack public companies, so most people felt their only chance at a safe and reliable investment came from property. As a result of those two factors, there was a massive boom in the property industry in China that lasted for about 2 decades, with property prices rising 10% year after year, generating huge amounts of wealth. The problem was that behind the scenes, this was all funded by huge amounts of debt taken out by property developers, and instead of growing at a slow but steady pace, the entire industry decided to leverage themselves to the max and cash in while they could. Property prices exploded, and normal people could no longer afford to buy homes, so the government stepped in after saying that they would be changing the industry and would be stopping apartments from being investments, turning them back into homes. They did this with the 3 red lines policy that changed debt requirements overnight. About 60% of the property developers in China suddenly found themselves over-leveraged and unable to take out any new debt. The problem was they were paying off their old debt with this new debt, and they had been doing so for years, but suddenly that wasn't possible anymore, so these developers started to crash and collapse, as we saw in September of 2021 with Evergrande, the second largest property developer in the world. More developers started to follow, and suddenly confidence in the housing market was falling apart. It became a rush for the exits, with everyone selling their assets before the crash would take hold, and thus property prices started their collapse. Now, the story does go far deeper than all of that, but that is the gist of what happened. I've spoken about this at length, and particularly about what will happen next for the Chinese property market, and my position has always been that this will result with the CCP taking complete control over these failing property developers, bailing them out, but then just running them themselves, preventing equally large collapses in the banking industry of China, but finally stamping out any hope of capitalism's triumph across the country. Now, as it turns out, that is exactly what this brand new leaked information is suggesting as well. But first, a quick word about an update to Stoic Financial Freedom, our private investor community, and our brand new exclusive course. We had been running on Patreon, but we've moved over to an independent platform that does not censor people and cancel them when they say the wrong thing. We're also massively revamping it as well, with 17 completely private lessons already made, explaining all the juicy stuff that would frankly get me demonetized, banned, and deleted on YouTube itself. The World Economic Forum, the truth about central bank digital currencies, and everything in between. On top of all this, we'll be adding brand new lessons every single month, and you even get direct message access to me myself, buy and sell alerts for my personal investments, and a bunch of benefits within the community itself. We are running a pre-sale for November only for 60% off to give back to our subscribers, but we're only offering 1 place each day, so I get a chance to chat to literally every new member, so you really do need to be quick. There are only 4 slots left, and this offer ends with November, so click the link down below in the description to get 60% off. Thank you for the continued support, and as always, stay stoic. So what exactly is this news? Well, China have tried a few measures to save the dying property industry already, but none have really had any success at all. Over the last few weeks, leaked information has been spreading around detailing what China's next attempt will entail. It's been summarized into a 16-point plan, but we really only need to pay attention to the most important and drastic points, the first of which is that financial institutions should treat property developers under state or private ownership equally. Now that may sound rather dull, but what it really means is that every single property developer in China now has the direct backing of the Chinese Communist Party, and banks have to recognize that and play by those rules. This is, let's not forget, China, a dictatorship where the government is king and any dissent is punishable by death, torture, or forced labor, and this rule is about making banks treat publicly owned developers like they're state-owned, not the other way around. For those developers that are state-owned, they really haven't faced any problems over the last year because the CCP is king. When a bank goes to them and asks them for money that they owe, they simply laugh and say to take it up with the Communist Party. Now the bank has to gauge what is going to happen if they go and ask this murderous regime for the money, or if they should maybe just keep their mouths shut and give the developer an extension on their loan with no interest. If the developer does go out and ask for what it's owed, then the Chinese government simply asks how much the developer owes. If they hear it's $10 billion, then they simply print $10 billion worth of yuan and they hand it over as they control the money supply in its entirety. This is how these state-owned developers have managed to be a-okay during the worst property collapse in the history of mankind, because they're basically an extension of the state itself, and this state does whatever it wants. Now, the CCP is turning around and telling the banks that they have to treat every single developer in the same way, regardless of whether or not they're actually state-owned. Now, when the banks go up to these developers and ask them for the money back, they get the same brick wall in front of them, but actually it goes even further than that, and this doesn't just apply to old loans that are already taken out. These banks now have to support these developers in whichever ways they require. They are being ordered to support local issuance by developers. They're being instructed that developers' outstanding bank loans and trust borrowings due within the next 6 months can be extended for a year, and they're being told to ensure continuous and stable fundraising by construction companies. Not only do these banks have to forget asking for their money back, they also have to go out and say that these developers have an extra year to pay them back their cash. They also have to help these developers release new bonds and raise more debt if they want to, and they have to ensure their funding for the future as well, which means just giving them even more money when they ask for it. This is like giving a shotgun to a toddler and expecting them to be reasonable. These developers took out trillions of dollars of debt that they could never afford to pay back, and now in response to the inevitable collapse of this ordeal, they're given complete and total authority to demand more money whenever they want. Now, the craziest thing about all this, I've only mentioned 3 of the 16 points so far. Some of the others include special loans for project completion to help failed developers finish their projects, and banks are also being instructed to offer additional financial support if needed. Banks have been told that buyers' credit scores are not to be impacted if they haven't been paying their mortgages, and that they're to renegotiate with home buyers if they ask. This policy is about flooding the property market with power and debt to try and stop the blood from draining every week, but the trillions of dollars of debt within this industry is the real reason for this collapse. These developers, even if they're not technically owned by the state, are now practically an extension of the state and its power, and let's be honest, ownership in China is entirely irrelevant anyway. Time and time again, we've seen people get too powerful, too successful, or too popular in China, so the Communist Party just takes all their assets away, throws them in jail, and deletes any mention of them from the history books. That is what's coming for these developers next. Total and complete state control to go along with their total and complete state authority. This is the nationalization of the construction and property industry in China, the largest of its type in the entire world. Now, one of the really interesting things about this is many investors are looking at this as if it's good news. They're saying, wow, this is loads of support from the Communist Party, this will stop the bleeding, it will stop the property market crash, and so they're throwing their money into these dying or dead property developers as if it's a smart investment. Country Garden, the largest property development company in the world, has seen its share price rise by 195% over the last month alone because of this news, and an index of Chinese property developers has risen by 42% over that same time period. Now, many point to this and use it to say that they were right all along, that you should have bought into China last year because it was so obvious that it was going to explode, that these share prices were going to increase. But those people have incredibly short memories, as even though Country Garden has seen its share price rise by almost 200% in 1 month alone, it still lost more than 80% of its value, and its graph still looks like this. The really weird thing about this all, though, is that investors are just ignoring what this means for the future. They are hyper-focusing on the good stuff while completely ignoring the truth behind these measures. The reality is that these shares will be worthless when the CCP takes them away from you and just announces that you have no ownership stake over the company at all. Or they'll lose almost all of their value when the CCP announces that profit is now illegal in the property industry in China, just like they did with the education industry last year, which led to this company, Tao Education, losing 98% of its value when it was worth over $50 billion. Any long-term viewers of the channel will already know this. I've been warning people for a long time about the future of Chinese markets, and still so many people have just ignored every piece of evidence I've shown them. This is a communist country. Stop being surprised when they attack markets and remove capitalism. It is literally in their nature. As for what's next for China, well, for once, I'm not going to say more of the same because that actually isn't going to happen. The property collapse here is actually going to subside with these changes, although it won't happen overnight. No more property companies will go bankrupt because, well, they just can't. How can you go bankrupt when the banks are being forced at gunpoint to give you money? How can you fail when the government makes it illegal for anyone to fail you? House prices will keep falling for a few months at least, and maybe even for a few years, as confidence is completely shot within this market. But the trend will slow down. Along with these changes come the other changes regarding investment properties that China is pushing. They want people to live in their apartments and not to invest with them, so China will never again see demand as high as it once was. They will never again see home prices that rival those of New York and London. We are surely and soundly watching a slow but steady reversal of capitalism in China, and it actually started all the way back in 2012 when Xi Jinping came to power. The winners of this change are the Communist Party. The losers are anyone with any kind of Chinese investment. Those who keep buying into Chinese companies or who are short-sighted enough to only see the last month of the charts and not the last years will one day have to write off 100% of their investments as the CCP seizes their assets. My only hope is that no one watching this video today is one of those unlucky investors. Make sure you go and look at the link down below in the description for Stoic Financial Freedom. There are only 4 slots left and a few days left to claim them before the 60% discount disappears forever. So until next time, stay stoic.